The desert had a way of holding its breath before trouble showed its face. The quiet came first, thick and watchful, the kind that made a man tighten his grip on a rifle without meaning to. Long before danger arrived, the land warned you. Rafael Ortega felt it as he stood at the fence line. His Winchester balanced in the crook of his arm, eyes narrowed toward the fading copper horizon. The light was draining from the sky in slow layers, and the sand drank it up like blood. An hour earlier, the herd had spooked, bolting east in a burst of dust and hooves, panic rippling through them like a shockwave. Now everything had gone still again. Too still. Even the cicadas had fallen silent. Beside him, Canelo stiffened. The shepherd mixed his ears pinned forward, a low growl trembling deep in his chest. Rafael knew that sound. The dog didn't waste his breath on shadows or wind. Something had been out there. Something bold or hungry or desperate enough to wander close. Rafael waited, breathing slow, letting the desert speak first. Shadows stretched long across the sand, dark fingers crawling toward his boots. Then Canelo's growl softened, easing into a low whine. Whatever had been stalking the herd had moved on. Rafael lowered the rifle inch by careful inch and brushed a hand over the dog's fur. "Good boy," he murmured. The air carried dust and heat and the faint salt tang of the Sea of Cortez, miles away but never truly absent. His father used to say the wind out here carried the stories. A man tried hardest to forget. Rafael had learned that was true. At 35, the land had shaped every bone in his body, carved him into something quiet and watchful. He turned toward the house, a scatter of weathered adobe buildings sitting alone in the vast Baja desert. No neighbors close enough to hear trouble if it came calling. Inside, he hung the rifle on its rack and lit the lamp. The glow revealed a small room worn smooth by years of use, and the guitar resting in the corner. Its strings were dusty and loose. He hadn't touched it since the last time he'd tried to sing, through grief and failed. Silence had been easier company since then. Supper was beans and tortillas, eaten alone at the small kitchen table. He washed the plate, stepped onto the porch, and watched the sky shift from copper to deep indigo as stars, pricked through the darkness. The wind stirred the mesquite branches, whispering secrets it never fully gave away. It carried something else, too, a sense of movement, trouble traveling the road. Don Mateo's warning replayed in his head. 3 men riding south, a trader robbed, questions asked about ranches run by lone men. Rafael didn't scare easy, but warnings like that had a way of settling into a man's bones. Morning came cold and gray. Rafael rose before the rooster, boots worn smooth by years of work sliding on easily. He milked the cows in the pale light, breath fogging the air, Canelo pacing nearby, alert but calmer than the night before. By midday, the sun pressed down hard enough that the barn's shadow felt like mercy. Rafael drank warm water from a tin cup, wiping sweat from his brow, when the sound reached him. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, coming up the road. He stepped from the barn as Don Mateo's gray mare came into view. The old man rode up and dismounted stiffly, eyes sharp as ever. "You look like a man expecting trouble," Mateo said. "Just keeping watch," Rafael replied. Mateo nodded. "Heard restless last night? Could have been coyotes. Could have been worse." He lowered his voice. "You hear about the peddler?" Rafael's jaw tightened. "Found him north of here. Goods gone, and the men who did it asked about ranches, south of La Paz. One's run by a man alone. They shared coffee and tortillas, speaking little more, and when Mateo finally rode off, Rafael stayed standing in the yard, watching the dust settle back into the earth. Evening came blazing orange, then softened into purple. Rafael worked until the light faded, then crossed the yard toward the house. Canelo stopped short, muscles taut, a growl rising again. Rafael followed the dog's gaze. A figure moved along the road, slow and unsteady. A woman. She dragged a leather valise behind her, dress stained with travel, hair pulled back in a loose braid. She stopped at the gate and lifted her face toward him. Even from a distance, he saw the determination in her eyes. "Buenas tardes," she called. "My name is Isabella Torres. I need a place to stay." Rafael didn't answer right away. His hand rested near the revolver at his hip. A lone woman at dusk in this stretch of Baja set every instinct on edge. "This is a ranch," he said finally. "Not an inn." "I know," she replied. but I can't walk any farther. I need one night under a roof. She lifted the valise, then faltered, letting it drop into the dust. I can pay with work, she said, or with courage. Not with money. The honesty in her voice struck harder than any plea. Dust clung to her braid. Sunburn reddened her cheeks, but her eyes didn't waver. Raphael thought of Mateo's warning, then of the empty house behind him. He opened the gate. The barn loft is dry, he said. You can stay the night. At dawn, you move on. Relief softened her shoulders. Gracias, Señor Ortega. Canelo sniffed her boots, wary but calmer. As Raphael led her to the loft, lantern light flickered over her face. She moved with a quiet grace that didn't match the dust on her dress. When she thanked him again, her voice carried something heavy beneath the surface, something she wasn't ready to name. Raphael didn't ask, not yet, as he climbed down the ladder and walked back toward the house. The air felt different. Not danger, exactly. Change. And out here, change rarely came alone. He woke before the sky fully lightened, expecting the loft to be empty. Travelers usually moved on before sunrise. But before he reached the barn, he heard the soft rhythm of milk splashing into a pail. Inside, Isabella knelt beside a brown cow, skirt pinned up, hair tied at her neck. Her hands moved with practiced ease. I hope you don't mind, she said without looking up. I thought I should start paying for the roof. Raphael leaned on the post. Where'd you learn that? My grandfather had land outside the capital, she said. I spent my summers there. She paused. Until he died. Raphael didn't press. She finished, wiped her hands, and met his eyes. I'll work as long as you let me. Raphael nodded. There's more to do than milking. The morning moved fast with chores. She didn't complain or slow. She worked like someone who'd run out of places to rest long before reaching his gate. Near midday, hoofbeats returned. Don Mateo rode in, concern etched deep. He eyed Isabella with a measuring look. This her? He asked. She's working, Raphael said. Mateo snorted. So does a mule, Raphael frowned. She's earning her stay, Mateo spat. Loneliness keeps you safe, hijo. It also keeps you empty. The words stuck under Raphael's skin long after. Mateo rode away. That evening they sat on the porch with mugs of coffee as the sky burned red, then purple. She spoke of markets and music, of a life crowded with noise and loss. He spoke of the ranch in better years, before drought and burial and quiet. The silence between them felt steady, not heavy. When a fence post groaned in the wind, Raphael stood. We'll fix it tomorrow. She looked at the post, then at him. If trust is a fence, she said softly, let me help you build it. Her words stayed with him as the night settled in. The next morning came cold and gray, and she was already in the yard with wire over her shoulder. They worked side by side, boots falling into the same rhythm. By noon, the fence stood tall again. Strong enough to hold cattle, she said. And strong enough to slow anyone trying to cut through, Raphael replied. Later that week, the days found their rhythm. Coffee before sunrise. Work until dusk. The house felt lighter with another voice in it. One afternoon, hoofbeats thundered in as Mariquita Lopez arrived, breathless. They hit another trader, she said. 3 men. One asked about a ranch south of La Paz. With a woman on it. Isabella didn't flinch. They're looking for me, she said quietly. The man I ran from doesn't forget. Raphael stepped closer. You're safe here. She shook her head. You don't know what he's capable of. I know enough, Raphael said. That night they sat in silence, fences and shadows filling their thoughts. I didn't come to be saved, Isabella said. I came to stand beside you. Something in Raphael softened. The quiet was different now, fuller. The desert listened. As it always did, the desert didn't change its face just because 2 people had found something worth holding on to. It stayed wide and watchful, offering no promises beyond sun, wind, and consequence. Before sunrise, Isabella was already at the well, drawing water with steady pulls, her boots firm in the dust. Raphael joined her. Without a word, the rope creaking between them. She glanced up and offered a faint smile, one that carried no illusion about the days ahead. They worked through the morning with an unspoken understanding. every movement careful, purposeful. The men hunting her were somewhere out there, riding the long roads, asking their questions, leaving unease behind them like a trail of ash. That knowledge sat between Raphael and Isabella, not as fear, but as a weight they both acknowledged. Don Mateo's words echoed in Raphael's mind as he reinforced the gate hinges, checked the locks, and cleaned the Winchester until it gleamed dull and honest. Loneliness keeps you safe. It also keeps you empty. By midday, the heat pressed down hard, and they retreated into the shade of the barn, stacking hay in tight, efficient lines. Sweat darkened Isabella's collar, but she didn't slow. Raphael noticed how she watched the horizon even as she worked, eyes sharp, listening for sounds that didn't belong. That evening, as the sun bled into the earth, they sat together on the porch. Canelo lay at their feet, alert but calm. "If they come," Isabella said quietly, "they won't stop with threats." Raphael nodded. "Then they won't find us unready." She studied his face, the lines carved by sun and solitude. "You don't owe me this." He met her gaze. "I choose it." The words settled between them, solid as stone. The night passed without incident, but the air felt tight, stretched thin. Over the next days, the ranch transformed. Gates were braced, lanterns positioned for signals, ammunition counted and recounted. Isabella moved through it all with a steady resolve that deepened Raphael's respect. She wasn't hiding. She was standing her ground. One evening, as they shared supper, she spoke of the man she'd fled. Not his name, but his nature. Control dressed up as charm, violence hidden behind influence. "He doesn't lose what he thinks belongs to him," she said. Raphael listened without interruption, anger simmering quiet and dangerous in his chest. When she finished, he reached across the table and covered her hand. "You belong to yourself." Her breath hitched, but she nodded. Later that night, as wind rattled the shutters, Isabella stood in the kitchen doorway, lantern light framing her face. 2 plates sat waiting. Beans, squash, tortillas. This wasn't just supper. They ate slowly, the silence full. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I've been thinking about how things are between us." Raphael stiffened slightly. "Dangerous thoughts?" "Honest ones," she replied. "You gave me a roof. I gave you work. But that's not the real exchange happening here." He leaned back, arms folding. "Say what you mean." "I mean sharing the roof," she said softly. "Sharing the bed. Sharing the truth." The words landed heavy and unavoidable. Raphael looked at her hands, then her eyes. "It's not simple." "It is," she said, "if we choose it." He told her about the woman who'd left him, the way her absence had hollowed the house. "If we do this," he said, "it's real." "That's the only way it matters," she answered. The decision settled without drama, like a fence post driven deep enough to hold. That night, the lamp burned low as Raphael stepped onto the porch, weighing risk and promise. When he went inside, he didn't turn toward the barn. Isabella followed him into the house, carrying only a folded blanket and her small bag. "You'll move in tonight," he said quietly. "If you're sure." "I am." The room was simple, sturdy, honest. They stood facing each other, breath mingling. "No pretending," she said. "I remember." Her hands rested lightly on his chest, feeling the steady thrum beneath. The kiss came slow and careful, carrying days of unspoken wanting. Outside, the wind rattled the world. Inside, the quiet softened. Morning brought a heaviness that had nothing to do with sleep. The days that followed bound them tighter. Work shared, meals shared, watchfulness shared. The ranch filled with purpose. Then one afternoon, as Isabella paused mid-task, a hand pressed to her belly, her face pale but certain. "Raphael," she whispered, "I think I'm carrying your child." The hammer slipped from his grasp. He crossed the yard and pulled her close, awe and fear tangling together. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I know my body." He held her, words failing him. That evening, Don Mateo arrived, congratulations offered with a grave look. "They're asking questions in San Antonio," he warned. "They're moving south." Isabella stood tall at Raphael's side. "Then we prepare." For 3 days they worked like one. Heartbeat, reinforcing, planning, watching. Mariquita rode in again, breathless with news of another robbery, Another question about a woman with green eyes. Raphael felt Isabella's hand slide into his. Together, he said. Dusk brought shadows at the fence line. 3 riders lingered, testing, watching. Raphael raised his Winchester. Isabella stood beside him, pistol steady, her courage unflinching. The men didn't attack, not yet. They melted back into the dark. Morning erased their tracks, but not the threat. "They'll return," Isabella said. "And we'll be ready," Raphael answered. The desert listened, as it always did, waiting to see what kind of story would be written. Next, waiting became its own kind of labor. The days after the riders vanished stretched long and taut, like wire pulled too tight. Every sound carried weight. Every distant movement drew the eye. Raphael rose before dawn, checking the perimeter while the world was still washed in gray, the air cool enough to sting his lungs. Isabella watched him from the doorway, one hand resting unconsciously at her stomach, the other holding a mug of coffee she barely drank. Fear lived there now, but it didn't rule her. It sharpened her. They spoke little about the men, not because the danger was forgotten, but because it had already been accepted. The ranch had become more than land and buildings. It was a line drawn in the sand, a promise. As the week passed, no riders appeared. But word traveled the way it always did in dry country, on wind and worry. Travelers spoke of violence farther north, of men who rode without mercy and left silence behind them. Don Mateo stopped by often, sometimes with news, sometimes with nothing more than his presence. He watched Isabella with a careful respect now, no longer dismissive. One evening, as they repaired a gate hinge together, he said quietly, "You've changed this place?" Isabella met his gaze. "It changed me too." Mateo nodded, satisfied. The church bells in La Paz rang the following Sunday, clear and bright across the town square. Raphael and Isabella stood before a small gathering, hands clasped, her dress simple and white, the breeze lifting it gently. Her hand rested protectively over her belly. Raphael's voice didn't waver when he spoke his vows. Neither did hers. "We choose each other, storm or sun." The words felt older than the walls around them, rooted deep as the land itself. They rode home as husband and wife beneath a sky stretched wide and blue, the desert opening before them without resistance. That night the wind shifted. Clouds rolled in low and fast, dark with promise. By the time the first thunder cracked, the midwife had arrived, her bag set down with practiced calm. Isabella's labor came hard and relentless, each wave stronger than the last. Raphael stayed at her side, her hand locked in his, murmuring steady words meant as much for himself as for her. "You've held fences against worse," he whispered. Lightning split the sky. Rain hammered the adobe walls. And then, through the roar of the storm, a cry rose sharp and strong. A boy, dark hair plastered to his head, eyes bright and fierce. Isabella held him close, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. Raphael laid a hand against his son's back, the weight of that small life grounding him in a way nothing ever had. "He'll know he was wanted," Isabella whispered. "He'll know," Raphael promised. Dawn broke clean anew. The storm had scoured the land, erasing hoof prints, washing away the last signs of threat. The desert stood quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. Raphael stepped onto the porch with his son cradled against his chest. The land stretched wide and open, not empty anymore, but full. Don Mateo arrived later, tipping his hat with a rare smile. "Looks like you built more than fences," he said. Mariquita hovered nearby, eyes shining as she peeked at the baby. "What's his name?" Raphael looked to Isabella. "Alejandro," she said softly. Years later, people would say the story began with danger, but those who knew better understood it began with a woman walking a lonely road and a man who chose to open his gate. What they built after that became the heart of the desert. A family, a home, a life worth defending. And every evening, long after the cattle settled and the world grew still, 2 cups waited on the porch side by side, catching the last light as the sun slipped quietly away. Desert never stopped watching them, even after the storm scrubbed, the land clean, and the cries of a newborn replaced the crack of thunder. Baja remained what it had always been, beautiful, unforgiving, honest. Dawn spread pale gold across the sand as Raphael stood on the porch. Alejandro bundled against his chest, the baby's warmth seeping into him like something sacred. Isabella rested just inside the doorway, exhausted but glowing, her eyes following them both. The ranch breathed differently now. Where silence once pressed heavy, it settled gentle, filled with purpose. The adobe walls held laughter alongside memory. Trouble had not vanished from the world, but it had loosened its grip on this patch of earth. Don Mateo arrived before noon, moving slower than usual, his hat held with uncharacteristic care. He studied the child, then Raphael, then Isabella. "The desert tests what it's given," he said quietly. "Looks like it decided to keep you." Isabella smiled faintly. "We're stubborn," she replied. Mateo chuckled, a sound rarely heard. News traveled quickly. By the end of the week, word spread that the riders had turned north, drawn into other conflicts, other hungers. They never returned. Whether it was the storm, the reinforced gates, or the quiet knowledge that this ranch would not break easily, no one could say. What mattered was that the danger passed, like so many desert winds, leaving no promise it wouldn't return, but offering peace for now. The days settled into a new rhythm. Isabella healed, strong as ever. Alejandro growing louder by the day, his cries cutting through the quiet like proof of life. Raphael worked the land with renewed focus, every fence post and gate carrying deeper meaning. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was legacy. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, Alejandro sleeping between them, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cooling air. The wind still whispered through the mesquite, carrying stories of men who wandered and women who endured, of violence and love tangled together across generations. Isabella listened sometimes with her eyes closed, her hand resting over Raphael's. "Do you ever think about the road I walked to get here?" she asked once. Raphael nodded. "Every day. I don't regret it," she said. "Even the fear." He looked at her, at the lines of strength and softness coexisting in her face. "Neither do I." Alejandro grew into the land the way Raphael once had. Knees dusty, laughter loud, curiosity boundless. Years later, travelers would stop at the Ortega Ranch and feel it, the sense that something unbreakable lived there. They'd hear the story told in pieces at markets and cantinas. Some said it was about danger. Others claimed it was about fate. But those who sat on the porch at sunset, watching Isabella move through the kitchen window, Light and Raphael tune a guitar he'd finally lifted again, understood the truth. It was about a gate opened at the right moment, about choosing to stand instead of hide, about love built like a fence, slow, deliberate, strong enough to hold against the world. And every evening, as the sun dipped low and the desert exhaled, 2 cups waited side by side, catching the last light. Proof that even in the harshest places, a life worth defending could take root and endure.